Roll call, please, Ms. Saban.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Ayers?
Here.
Mrs. Blackman?
Here.
Mrs. Hoskins?
Here.
Mr. Canwisher?
Here.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Here.
Dr. Order?
Here. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With liberty and justice for all.
Are there any questions regarding this evening's agenda? If not, I will take a motion.
I move the board approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hoskins, second by Mr. Canwisher to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Vision statement. It is the vision of the Pleasant Valley Community School District to provide the finest academic and extracurricular programs in the state. Not in some things, but in everything. Not for some students, but for all students. Welcome to our guests. If you would like to address the board regarding a non-agenda item, now would be your opportunity to do so. If you would like, just come up to the front of the podium, state your name, your capacity within the district. You will get 3 minutes to address the board. Since it is a non-agenda item, we will not be able to address the item, but we will be listening to you. And if you're going to mention anything, if you're going to make any comments, please try and keep it confidential just so that we can hear what you have to say and make it a little bit more general. Anybody want to address the board on a non-agenda item?
Hello, my name is Dominique Friebel and I have 2 children in the Pleasant Valley School District. I wanted to speak today to thank Mr. Tim Beck. I was recently made aware that the Iowa Public Information Board ruled in favor of him that the PV administration did not actually follow chapters 21 and 22 of the Iowa Meetings Law during the book reconsideration meeting that was held this past school year. I appreciate that the PV school district has a reconsideration avenue for instructional material. However, not being able to witness it in its entirety was very frustrating for me, and I know for several others on both sides of the issue. I look forward to giving input when the board reaches the readings of Board Policy Series 600 to make it a more clear and fair process. I would like to encourage fellow parents and citizens within the PV school district to continue attending PV school district meetings and watching via their broadcasts on YouTube. I really enjoy it. You can get a lot done and stay informed. I was shocked by Mr. Beck's tireless efforts to ensure that things were followed the correct way. And since they were not, he followed through pursuing the Iowa Public Information Board to ensure that our district knows the proper way for this process in the future. I know that we are all extremely busy and we should all be grateful to him for his efforts. So thank you, Mr. Beck, and I don't know if he's here tonight, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to address the board?
Fred Dodds, taxpayer, Shelterbrook Court, Bethel. I didn't know Dominique was going to be here because I'm here to publicly thank Dominique for her courage to challenge the availability of an obscene book in the Pleasant Valley High School Library. The book was titled All Boys Are Not Blue. While she never, and I repeat, she never suggested banning the book. Her request to have the book removed as age inappropriate turned out to be a red flag for all parents in the PV district. I and many other community members believe that parents should have the major input in what materials are appropriate for their children to see. The book review committee was comprised of 7 individuals, 6 who were either on the district payroll or affiliated with the school board. I think it would have been much better had there been more representation from the general public. I and other community members question whether the scheduling the time of the review committee may have been chosen to discourage community attendance. 4:30 on a Friday afternoon is not the most advantageous time to encourage parental participation. But it was an opportune time for many teachers who had the afternoon off from teaching to contrive their attack against Ms. Freeble's request. No one would ever challenge the right of the teacher's participation in the discussion. However, many of the teachers totally mischaracterized her request by repeatedly using the words "ban the book," when she never, and I repeat again, she never requested nor suggested banning the book. Thirdly, I and many other community members feel that Peter Olson, a parent and taxpayer, was defamed at the meeting by the suggestion that he was threatening harm to someone. Passionate? Peter passionate? Yes. Threatening? No. Far from it. He has spoken on several occasions to this board and has proven himself to be informed, caring, and willing to stand up for what he believes. In fact, there was a sheriff's deputy present at the meeting who made no attempt to intervene, restrain, or remove Mr. Olson. It would seem, at the very least, that Mr. Olson should get a public apology for having his character impugned. Lastly, I want to thank Tim Reck for his 5-month pursuit to seek redress at the open meeting law violation by the chairman of the Reconsideration Committee. The Iowa Public Information Board ruled on September 15th that the Pleasant Valley School District violated the open meetings law. And at the end of it all, the district achieved its goal to retain obscene material in the high school library, material that I hope that any of you would be hesitant, if not down ashamed, to read this material to your kids or your grandkids. We can do better. So I challenge you, me, all of us, to do better in the future, to be more honest, more transparent. Let's do it for the kids. Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Lynn Lundberg. I'm a teacher at Pleasant Valley High School, and I did not intend to come and address the board, but I'd just like to make a brief response to the 2 comments that were made previously, just on a couple of points. This is completely impromptu, but number 1, the idea of wondering whether there wasn't a threat because there wasn't an intervention by a law enforcement officer doesn't account for feelings of people who were sitting up front and who had fingers pointed at them and who were told, your vote will be remembered, there will be consequences. While that's not a direct threat, it was an implied threat. And as somebody who was sitting in that position, I also felt that threat. Now, somebody else may not have felt that that was a threat, but those of us who were pointed at perceived a threat. That's worth noting. Whether the state of Iowa chose to uphold that idea or not is immaterial to the feelings of the people who were present that day. The other thing that I'd just like to point out is that standards for indecency, standards for obscenity are always kind of a moving target. But the key thing that I think is, as a teacher, that I think is really important to keep in mind about any material is, will it serve a purpose that is a positive purpose for a student in this district? I would imagine that a student who is gay and Black would find that book, All Boys Aren't Blue, to be remarkably affirming to that student's right to dignity, that student's right to self-affirmation. And that is a worthwhile goal. It doesn't mean that anyone is forced to read that book to children or grandchildren. But it does mean that having access for someone for whom that book would be a compelling and positive force is a good thing. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to address the board on a non-agenda item? Okay, moving on. Mr. Anderson.
Nothing.
Mr. Ayers.
I have nothing, thank you.
Nothing for me, thanks.
Coco?
I would just like to thank all the
all the students, all the families, all the administrators, teachers who were involved in homecoming. Last week we had, from my view, was a great week. The elementaries participated in dress-up days. There was a lot of excitement. They did the pep rally at the junior high, the pep rally at the high school. The assembly went very well. We had wonderful weather. We had a football win, and there was just a lot of work put into all of that, including the carnival and the parade and the dance and all that. So just a big thank you to everyone who helped put that on and participated in it.
Thank you. Mr. Camisher?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Williams-Smith?
I have nothing.
Mr. Hyatt?
I would just want to expand a little bit on that to not only the celebratory cultural aspects of homecoming, but also thanks to our Spartan Assembly and the focus on learning for our people. Our young people put a lot of time, energy, and reflection and learned from those experiences of coordinating an event of that magnitude. So special thanks to that particular group of high school students as well as the elementary PTAs who helped provide games out in our community. If you were over there, it was awesome.
Thank you. Ms. Kenyon?
I'm good.
Okay. I know you have some recognition, Mr. Zimmer, so I'll wait for you for just a bit. Ms. Damon?
No, thank you.
Mr. Struess?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Okay. Back to you, Mr. Zimmer.
All right, well, at this time, I'd like Mr. Erickson to come up and do recognition for our National Merit Center finalists.
Thank you. Here I'll stand because there's we have a lot of people here to recognize, so.
Could you just take a step?
I'm all right here, perfect, thank you. I wanted to start with recognizing two of our students who received national recognition from our college board. So first, I'd like to recognize Joshua Thomas, son of Marcus and Arena. He was honored in the National African American Recognition Program. So, Joshua. There you go. Next, I'd like to recognize Margil Sanchez Carmona in the National Hispanic Recognition Program. The students' academic achievements in school, outstanding performance on the PSAT and AP exams. So those are great honors, so thank you and congratulations to both of you. Next, it's my privilege to introduce the 2023 National Merit Scholarship semifinalists. So these students will be competing for approximately 7,250 scholarships offered each year. These students qualify based on their scores on the PSAT, in which less than 1% of our state seniors meet the criteria. So these candidates are the top of both our class and the state's class. So from here, the students will submit their finalist applications, and National Merit finalists will be announced in February. National Merit Scholarship recipients will be selected from the finalists beginning in April. We have 9 semifinalists, and I believe they're all here tonight along with their families. So thank you for allowing the time to recognize these students. Could you please stand as we read your names? So, Bruce Allen, son of Brian and Maribeth Allen. Daughter of George Binto and Susan Mypie. Gretchen Heiberger, daughter of William and Michelle Heiberger. Shobani Iyer, daughter of Subbu Natarajan and Sujitha Srinivasan. Kanather, son of Naveen Kanather and Seema Narvi. Maradu, son of Koti and Gauthami Maradu. Kushi Mehta, daughter of Nilash and Rajan Mehta. Anuga Sundidra, daughter of Ravinda Sujindra and Jayashri Karnam. Thomas, son of Marcus and Irina Thomas. Accomplishment for all of you. Congratulations and best of luck moving forward. Board, if you have any questions, please.
Well, on behalf of the board, this is always a phenomenal recognition and congratulations to all of you. We always ask out of curiosity at this point in time. I'll start back with you, Bruce, and then you guys can kind of work your way on up. Bruce, what future plans? What are you looking at? Schooling, programs?
I mean, I don't know yet. Probably college, but you know, got a full life ahead of me, so I'm sure I'll figure it out.
Any specific area of interest?
Maybe like criminal justice or something.
Very nice.
Passions change, so
Sure.
that's it right now.
Anyone else would like to go?
Well, I can go. I'm really interested in the field of medicine, so I'm looking right now at pursuing a career as a neurologist, but honestly, all parts of medicine fascinate me, so just looking to see where it'll take me.
Fantastic. And coursework that's kind of helped you at Pleasant Valley with that?
I'm taking a lot of science this year, so like microbiology, anatomy, all of that's really helpful.
Fantastic. Joshua?
I'm also interested in the field of medicine, more specifically psychiatry. AP Chem is helping with that right now because of the whole like pharmaceutical aspect of that, and then psychology is something that I'm really interested in.
Well, the mental health field is certainly an area that is wide open, Joshua, so I hope that's an area that you find some passion in and stick with for sure.
I'm interested in the field of medicine as well, particularly cardiology. And yeah, I plan to go to a 4-year college and then medical school after that. And yeah, the classes that I've taken that helped me a lot. Even freshman year, I took a Principles of Biomedical Science class. And this year I'm taking AP Chemistry and Anatomy and Physiology. So I think those classes will be really helpful down the line.
I plan on going to a 4-year college, probably major in physics or computer science, and I think Mr. Spang's probably one of the best teachers I've ever had, like in all 12 years, and he just like makes every student fall in love with physics, so I thank him for that.
I'm also interested in the medical field, and specifically cardiology, and I'm probably going to major in biology.
I'm also looking forward to be part of the medical field, probably something hands-on like surgery or, you know, somewhere along those fields. And some classes that really helped me throughout were like normal like science classes like anatomy, but also I really think the English classes helped me a lot because coming to high school I wasn't like really good at English, but taking classes like Honors English 9 with Mr. Fry and AP Lang with Dr. L, I feel like those classes really helped me with like communication skills and like, you know, general thinking and putting it on paper.
I'm interested in engineering, particularly chemical engineering, and I feel like classes like AP Chemistry and AP Physics have really ignited my passion, so thank you PV for offering those courses.
And Miguel? I'd like to hear from you. What areas are you looking at or thinking of for post-secondary?
Yeah, so right now I'm mostly looking at studying architecture in college, and a class that's been really helpful is actually a class I'm taking this year, which is a dual credit course for civil engineering and architecture. I'm just learning a lot about that, and you know, we learn how to use, we're about to learn this week how to use the Revit software, which is really important in the field, and there's also going to be opportunities with actual local architecture firms, which I'm really looking forward to.
Are there any questions from the board to any of these students?
Do any of you know where you're going to school? We're all kind of undecided still.
I definitely don't.
Well, I'm sure you have lots of options, so good luck figuring it out.
Thank you.
Something down there? Anything want to say?
No, you got them.
They got everyone? Yeah. All right.
Any other questions from the board? Well, this is always really, all of the meetings are important, but this is really especially important because it highlights the academic success that we have at Pleasant Valley. And every year, it seems like the amount of students we have there are national merit finalists continue to either increase or be pretty stable. And it seems to be that we have the majority of them in this area. And I think a lot of it has to do with your hard work and your dedication, and then the instruction that we have here at Pleasant Valley. So you always will make us proud, and you guys all have really bright futures ahead of you. And just remember that self-belief and hard work will always grant you success. So just remember those two things. And I think that you guys are all on your way to really successful futures in whatever you decide to do. And just remember to follow your passions. All of you who are interested in medicine, there's a lot of fulfillment in that. And those are interested in engineering. In criminal justice, there's always important aspects of all those disciplines. And I think that you guys will all be very beneficial in those areas. So continue with that path that you've started here. Mr. Drews?
Mr. Zimmerman is bringing closing comments there, so.
Well, again, thank you for sharing. It's always good to get a little affirmation for our teachers and courses and the decisions that the boards make on course opportunities for you. We're always trying to look at what the interests are of our students and parents and try to get a program and study for you to be successful. We're not there yet, but we're always continuing to try to improve, and thank you for sharing that information, and great luck on the next step, and that is going for the scholarship money. So thank you very, very much. Parents, a lot to be proud of. Thank you.
So we're going to actually continue with the rest of the meeting, so this would be probably a good time for those who don't want to stay for the meeting to exit if you'd like. Okay. Are there any questions on this evening's consent agenda? If not, I will take a motion.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Anderson to approve this evening's consent agenda as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, approval of bills. General fund.
I move that the general fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $117,499.23 in payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Anderson, second by Ms. Kunkel, that the general fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nutrition fund.
I move that nutrition fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $49,907.79 in payment of invoice presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Anderson, that the nutrition fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, elementary junior high activity fund.
I move the elementary junior high activity fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $1,648.95 in payment of invoices presented.
Motion by Ms. Kunkel, second by Ms. Brockman, elementary junior high activity fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? High school activity fund.
I move that high school activity fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $25,344.44 in payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Cambridge, second by Mr. Ayers, that the high school activity fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Pebble fund.
I move that Pepple Fund warrants be issued in a total amount of $5,296 in payment of invoice presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Anderson, that the Pepple fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Internal service fund.
I move that internal service fund warrant 6421 to 6422 be issued in the total amount of $19,307.62 in payment of invoices presented.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hoskins, second by Mr. Ayers, that the internal service fund warrant 6421 to 6422 be issued in the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And then trust fund.
I move that trust fund warrants be issued in the total amount of $3,509 in payment of invoices presented.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Ms. Brockman, that the trust fund warrants be issued and the payment of invoices presented. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye. All opposed? Okay, moving on, there is no old business, so all we have left is some new business, and we will start with the board policy updates for the Department of Education. Mr. Struce?
Thank you, Dr. Wagley. So in the supporting materials tonight, and Beth will pull these up, there are currently 6 policies that we have as we get ready for our compliance review with the Department of Education. These are 6 policies that when you look at that really have to do with kind of our curriculum, our school calendar, curricular instructional options that we have that we must meet from the DE, and then also graduation requirements. So when you look at these 6, what you'll see is our current policy would be the items that are in black, and the red is what the Iowa School Board Association would suggest we place in there. So when you look at the first one, I'll kind of walk through the 6 of these tonight. And you can continue to review them, and because they're not new policies, we would approve these at our next board meeting. We'll take questions then as well, and before we approve them, if you do have questions. The first one here is Statement of Guiding Principles. What you see here in the first paragraph in red is just adding the non-discrimination component that we have in other policies, but they also wanted in this policy here. The next section there is just a part where we are blocking out kind of what our goal was before, or what we believe, to now what you would see in the red section, and the rest of the board policy is exactly the same as what we currently have in there today. So it's just those 2 changes that are recommended from the Iowa School Board when we had our last review, which would then put us in compliance for this upcoming review. The next one, 601.1, which is our types of school organization. Really very small change here, and that is just simply that we have may include preschool programming. So we have our kindergarten through 6th grade, but we have 2 elementaries that do have preschool, so just including that in that piece in the structure of our schools. Nothing else there. The school calendar, when you look at this one here, again, it's really not too much of a change. Thank you, Beth. With 601.2, the concept is basically the same, what you saw in our old policy to where this one is. It's just kind of reordering and some different verbiage that they have. But the highlights as you go through these, the first paragraph that you have to have the 1,080 hours or 180 days, that you can't, second paragraph, you can't start before August 23rd. The next paragraph is the same. And actually the next one, the board in its discretion, that should actually be black font, not red there at the 30 hours or 5 days for graduating seniors, so that's the same. The next paragraph is exactly the same, minus the part that you see in red there. Develop the school calendar for recommendation, approval, and adoption by the board annually, which we've always done. It's just changed the verbiage there a little bit. And then the last one, again, if there's an amendment to a calendar, that we also bring those changes to the board, which we've done in the past, but it's just putting that in writing there. In 602.1, basic instruction, as you'll look at each one of these paragraphs at each of the levels, you'll just see that there has been a change in what the state expects in terms of computer science. So you'll see that and what the expectations are at least 1 grade level at the elementary. You can see the second junior high level, again, computer science, at least 1 grade level. And then at the high school level, it's financial literacy we've had to add in, which is part of our economics course, and then computer science. We will be in compliance with all of these when we do our review here come in December. And then the last one, again, is just another paragraph that we did not have in our policy, but just explains that the responsibility to develop regulations and to make sure we're following these at each of those 3 levels that we have. So again, just adding those new pieces that we did not have, but we are in compliance with. The graduation requirements, 605.4. Again, this is really just kind of a changing in the beginning, still what we've always done in terms of 23 units to graduation, just kind of change the verbiage. On social studies, we've listed out what the courses are, and you'll note that we put in there so that when they look at our policy, they know that we are offering financial literacy as part of that requirement in social studies. On the next page, page 2, Again, everything in the black is exactly the same. This just also states that, which we do right now with students who have an IEP, making sure that they have, it spells out that they would be reaching those core areas as well in that first paragraph. The next three are things that we've done, but we've never had in our board policy, and that's why we're making sure that they are in compliance. And that has to do with the PAGE program. If you're a legislative PAGE and you were accepted to do so, you do get credit for that because you're missing school. So you get social studies credit. Then you can also see the physical education piece if you're in an officer's training corps. And then the last one is the FAFSA completion, where we talk to students about that as well. So again, nothing that we haven't been doing, but putting those three that they recommended, we put those in place. Because you're missing school. Early graduation, again, on this one here, as you go through, this one's very similar to what we had before. Just a little bit of change in the verbiage in the first sentence from what the state had and what we have in there. The next 5 bullets or 5 points are all exactly the same as our current policy. The last piece in red is actually a bullet point. When you read it, it's not really a criteria. It's more what happens if a student does graduate early. So that's why we moved it from a number 6 to its own separate paragraph. And that just states that if a student were to graduate early, they're no longer considered a student, but they can be part of graduation. If there's anything else they're involved, they have to get permission with. So still an alumnus of the school district, but what does the rest of their senior year look like when they graduate in January? So it's just putting that in writing and stating that. So these are 6 policies, like I said, that we make sure the state knows what we are doing and that we're following the expectations of where we should be with instruction, school calendar, and graduation requirements. Those are things that they look for when they go through our courses.
So if a student, let's say, wants to graduate early, but let's say they want to do cross-country, or like something in the spring.
No, they are not. They can walk through graduation, but other things, no.
That's part of the conversation the principal and the counselor says if a student expresses interest in it, which is why the number of early grads has really gone down in relationship to the number of students that are serving because of the fact that we've got the concurrent enrollment courses. I mean, it really, for a student to make that and family to make that choice now, it's either they're moving or there's something really going on to make that decision to forego the district paying for what it has to offer, the participation and everything. But because graduation only occurs once in that academic year, that's why it's in the spring. If we had 2 graduations, whether they go in the first one, then that would be it. That's why.
And some elect to come back, some don't.
Yeah.
Other questions at all preliminarily? Okay, so this will be on the next board meeting's agenda as well, and at that time, unless, if people have changes, then there'll be changes, but otherwise, it'll be voted for approval at the next meeting.
Yep. So just read through with that knowledge now and see if you have any questions for the next one.
I actually had one question.
Yep.
I thought we added last year or sometime, the class that the counselors were doing, was that like a career readiness? That was like a requirement now, isn't it? Does that need to be in here?
It's not part of what's in chapter 12 per se.
Okay.
But we do have its career planning, which begins in 8th grade, and they start looking at the courses they're going to take.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not part of the graduation requirement piece of it.
Oh, okay.
Which is why service learning is in it.
Oh, got it.
I have another question on the 30 hours that seniors get.
Yes.
I know that that's usually traditionally been done. Is that just an assumption, or are there certain students that will not get the 30 hours because either they haven't fulfilled anything or they haven't met all their requirements? For instance, I remember we were talking about the whole, community service, and we've run into issues there. If their community service is not done, do they get the 30 hours?
I think the biggest thing there is they would not be a graduate in good standing at that point. So really the 5 days where it comes into play is that our graduation is always on Memorial Day.
Right.
And we still have 4 more days of school left. So a lot of what you see in that early graduation is that part of it, is that they are done earlier than our normal school day. So if a student still had things to complete after graduation, they still come back and complete.
Yeah, they would be coming back.
Correct. Whether it's summer school or whatever it might be to get to earn their credit. Yes.
And a clarification on that, they're not allowed to walk if they haven't met the criteria anyway. So they can still graduate with their class as long as they've completed all the requirements before we start school the following year. Otherwise, then they go into the next year's, which kind of goes into what we're gonna talk about why dropout rate and graduation rates can be different.
And there were weather days, they're not impacted by what, they're excused from weather days too.
Mr. Shrews, just one thing, just a comment on the graduation requirements, if that's true, what you had said, service learning probably shouldn't be on there. Either CCR needs to be on, the career college readiness, or service learning needs to come, you know what I'm saying, to be consistent with that. I would say, whichever way we wanna go.
Okay. We'll pursue that question further then.
Anything else? Okay, moving on to the high school West Chiller project. Leland and Mr. Struess?
So, actually at the high school, there's 3 chillers. There's 2 on the east side of the building, there's 1 on the west side of the building. The one on the west side of the building was installed around 2004. It's about 18 years old. Normal life is about 20 years. This one, as Mr. Zimmer can probably even tell us, I think they've had trouble with it since the day it was installed. That's also the same one that takes care of the auditorium. Currently this year, we've had trouble. We've had repair people out multiple times this year and last year. We're looking at replacing it possibly next summer. It all depends on supply chain issues. So they're telling us that it could take 4 months to 12 months just to get the chiller itself. So what we're in the process of doing right now is we're looking at working together with Shive Hattery to design the project and do all the engineering consulting for the project. And then we'd actually purchase the chiller. Then once we actually know when the chiller is going to arrive, we would then work on the installation part of the chiller, so we'd know if it's going to arrive in the spring, summer, or fall. So, and the actual budget numbers for it, the chiller itself is around $200,000. It's a 220-ton chiller. 220 ton probably doesn't mean a whole lot to most people, but a lot of people, a typical home is 2.5 to 3.5 ton. So that kind of gives you the size of it. It's a pretty good size. And then the actual installation part of it, with Shive Hattery's portion, we've got about another $225,000. So the budget for it right now is $400,000 to $425,000. So, any questions?
Questions from the board?
We hope to have this in based on supply by next school year, is that what you said?
It'd be nice to have it by next school year. It could actually take a year to get it. We're assuming we can probably get it in 4 to 6 months. But we don't know, being that it's gonna be an open bid, you don't know which vendor's gonna get it, and you don't know what their supply chain's gonna look like. So it just depends on who the winning bidder is. So you just don't know these days. The one vehicle that we've ordered, we're still, that's, how many months is that in, Mike? 6 months? We've been waiting already, and we don't even have a ship date yet.
Leland, is that chiller unit, would that be large enough if the board decided to add any addition on to the south side of that wing, or would that be a separate chiller having to serve that?
Depends on how big. Actually, the east and west are connected, but it's not 100% redundant. It's actually, let's say when the west side goes down, you can get some cooling from the east side, but it's just maybe like 30%. So, the good news is the east side is, both chillers on that side are fairly new.
It's one of those things we just hope that it comes sooner versus later, because it is what, like it says, it chills it's your air conditioning unit, so, in that side of the building, so we need it as soon as we possibly can.
So can you explain a little bit more about, so the chiller obviously is $220,000 or so, or 200, whatever.
Yeah.
What is the construction part that needs to be done as well? I mean, in my simplistic mind, you just replace it and that's it. So obviously there's a lot more to it, and I'm kind of missing that aspect. So if you could explain that to me a little bit.
Sure. The refrigerant itself has changed. If you know, I'm not sure if you know anything about CFCs and the different, you've heard of R22 or R12, R134. The one the chiller we have right now is 407, which is, it's odd. It's something that's not common. So there's two sections of the chiller. There's the part that's outside that if you're over by the dumpsters, over by the cafeteria, there's a fenced in area. That's the actual chiller. And there's piping that actually goes into the building, through the custodial office and into the boiler room. And then there's called a chiller bundle. So that all that refrigerant has to be piped into the building. It goes into the bundle. And that refrigerant actually cools down the water on the inside. So there's piping and pumps on the inside. There are 8 and 10 inch lines on the inside that cools that water down. And the water is actually transferred out to the building to cool down the individual rooms and areas. So there's quite a bit. And just in the chill room itself, now because the refrigerant is inside the building, now you have to have safety items in there. So you've got refrigerant monitors, exhaust fans if that let's say you sprung a refrigerant leak. So you have safety items in there. The one option we looked at was you could actually take that and put it outside. So you have the bundle and the chiller outside. But you have water then it's outside, so you have to drain it down. And then the spring and the fall, usually if you drain it down, you have to do it all at once. And then you can't just turn it back on in an hour or two. It might take 4 to 8 hours to turn it back on. And being that has the auditorium on that side, we said, you know what, we're better off to keep it inside. So if we have a day in, let's say April, where it's really, really warm out, or March, we could turn it on for the auditorium or for the cafeteria, if that means. So because you have large amounts of people in there. If not, you'd have to, if you have a play or something that night, they'd have to suffer through whatever temperatures they have. So we decided to leave the bundle on the inside so we could run it at a moment's notice. Does that help you at all?
Yeah, it does.
So replacing this a couple of years early, or is the plan all along been about 18?
It's been, I've been here a little over 3 years now. I've never seen it run 100%. It's always been only 1/3 to 2/3 of it running. Right now we have the whole chiller running, but it actually has leaks. So it's leaking refrigerant out of it. Slow leaks, they're not fast leaks. But every year you're gonna have to put more refrigerant into it. And it's about 20-pound can is about $1,000. And that probably holds 300-400 pounds. So it's slowly bleeding you away with cost.
From a financial.
Yep, that's a great question. So
capital perspective.
Yep. So you'll actually hear later tonight when Mike talks about where we are with some of our year-end budgets. You will actually see we shifted a couple of things. For example, buses, we usually pay for our bus lease out of PEPL. We've taken that out of PEPL and we're gonna pay it with general fund this year and next year because that freed up more money to use for PEPL, which was part of roofs, which we've been doing a lot of roof projects, boilers and chillers are the three things. And these are the ones that we've been talking about now for a few months about how we set aside money for this one and a couple other ones that are in their life expectancy spans. So you'll see that when Mike goes through that tonight.
And the last question I had for you is, with the new chiller, we expect some substantial savings from higher efficiencies, 18 years of technology that's occurred since?
I hope so. It should be pretty significant. And actually the chiller and the boiler we had them in the 5-year plan, so it's not like it's a big surprise. We took the boiler back off. We had the boiler evaluated last year. It looks like it's up on age, but when they came out and looked at it, inspected it, they said you can probably get another 10 or 20 years out of it. So we actually took that back out. So that was good news.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I know we're at the mercy of when you get the bid of who's gonna do it, but I know with the Forest Grove project, we've heard about some issues with the chiller there. And so how are we gonna get some assurance that the same issues with this new chiller are not gonna happen with the issues we're having right now at Forest Grove and the chiller there?
It's like everything else, there's no guarantees. It's not, in fact, those aren't even what you're seeing at Forest Grove right now. And there's a leak right now at Forest Grove is what he's referring to. It's just an O-ring. So it's just a little gasket, and they've replaced the gasket once already, and they're gonna have to come back and replace it again. But it's it's not even, that's not even in the manufacturer. It wasn't the manufacturer, the installer. It was actually, what they call it is auxiliary devices. It's just part of the construction part of it. So it's wherever they bought those auxiliary devices, that particular device, it's either poorly made or the rubber is just not a good quality rubber. You hope that you don't run across that. But in this case, you're also hoping the contractors come back and they're gonna cover the stone earth warranty and stuff like that, because this is something that shouldn't fail. It's a cost that the school district should not have to absorb.
Yeah, I just wanna make sure that we don't run into the same problem with, that, even from a maintenance service standpoint that we've been with Forest Grove. I don't want the same thing to happen with the high school.
Yeah.
I mean, stating that up front, letting them know that, when they ultimately get the bid, that we expect that type of service if possible, and getting things fixed if there's an issue would be helpful, especially if this chiller has been a problem for the last 20 years. We want it to be a new one there and not have the same problems over again.
Yeah, and the one thing we're looking at too, though, is how do you keep, I don't want to say just local business, but if you need service on it, especially quick business, and you don't want to, let's say they're coming out of Chicago, you don't want to have a service person come out of Chicago for 2.5 hours drive time to come out, look at it, and go back. So we'll have limitations on there. It says it has to be something that's actually locally maintained, that the service company's within 20 or 50 miles. So it's somebody that actually they're part of the community too, and that actually helps.
Any other questions at all? If not, then I'll take.
I move the board approve moving forward on the Pleasant Valley High School West Quarter replacement project as presented.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Cambridge, second by Ms. Bachman, that the board approve moving forward on the Pleasant Valley High School West Chiller Replacement Project as presented. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Brockman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoskins?
Yes.
Mr. Canwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Wagley?
Yes. Thank you, Leland.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the new business is the 2021-2022 annual report. Mr. Hyde and Mr. Zimmer.
So I'll go ahead and start off our recap, and there is, it starts with a message of celebration for sure. A lot of exceptional highlights within this, and I also want to give a message of gratitude to Beth Marsoon. She puts a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, as we affectionately refer to her as our word beautician. She has done a remarkable job of helping all of us put our heads together and look at data points, both for celebration and for goal setting for the future. So as you look through the initial pages at the average daily attendance, graduation rates, dropout rates, elementary class size initiative, I would just encapsulate those pages by saying there aren't a lot of drastic changes. It's been consistent and consistently strong. You can see in the average daily attendance a drop by a smidgen. We would assume that's due to the COVID protocol and the fact that we're working through attendance policy and procedure and seeing some resilience there as a point of celebration. Additionally, I'll let Mr. Zimmer speak to the graduation rates and dropout rates here in just a moment. As we look at our growth, our class sizes, we have remained true to that. Mr. Struess has talked about bumping over those by one at some grade levels and with strong justification as to why. And then I'm going to page 5 and looking at beyond the technology, at the cybersecurity steps that we have taken. We have continued to update you with that. Two-step verification has been a big point with regard to this cyber security piece. And Mr. Zimmer, do you want to speak to the graduation rate and dropout rate?
Yeah. You would think that, if our graduation rate is 94.6%, I ought to be able to predict what our dropout rate should be the opposite, and that's how we get to 100. But that's not exactly how it works. So we will have some students that will go 5 years, 6 years if their IEP is written such that they go until they're 21. Well, they're not counted in the graduation rate until they actually get their diploma, because if they receive their diploma from us, that's it. They're done. They cannot receive services anymore. So they go through the graduation process and ceremony with their peers, and then we count them in the graduation rate when they actually complete the program. And then we also have students that you would qualify in the actual dropout portion of it. Well, we don't let them go. I was on the phone. I know Mr. Erickson would be on the phone saying, hey, what can we do to get you back? And so they could come back and graduate with the next year. It is possible. It is possible to have more than 100% graduation rate, because we could hit that year where we have everybody coming in, plus we have the students that we're supposed to graduate maybe a year or two later, and they come on, and that could happen. So we're going to celebrate that date, but that's why there's a difference in there. We don't let people go.
I'm going to take us back to forward to page 6 and looking at the dollars and cents. The one piece, as I stated earlier, most of this is consistent with past annual progress report information, but I did want to draw your attention to the 2021-22 physical plant and equipment levy and capital projects fund expenditures, the actuals. If you look off to the mid-page on the right, that has dropped pretty significantly from last year, and that is due to Forest Grove construction. No real big changes there. So moving through this, and I'll allow, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them, but we'll take a little time at the end as well to answer any questions. This next page, on page 7, is one I would characterize as exceptional, and one that any district in the country would love to be able to highlight. If you look at those 7 bullets at the top in academics, there are some remarkable achievements, whether it is having the Iowa Teacher of the Year in Miss Russell, PVHS being named a National Blue Ribbon school, and that's just 1 out of 325 in the country, being rated the #1 school district in the state of Iowa by Niche, on down the line through all of our elementary schools being rated in the top 15 best public elementary schools in Iowa by Niche. That is remarkable. And when you look at the performance profile, we have awesome ratings for all of our buildings, lots to celebrate there. And working on down the line towards the bottom of the page tonight, we celebrated those National Merit semifinalists. You can see you had 16 of those last year. And when looking down our academic celebrations, the students in this district are doing us well. They are representing strong, and so much to celebrate in the pages following as well. When you look, this really comes back to our student-centered statement that we kick our board meetings off. Be the best academic and extracurricular in the state, not in one thing but in everything, not for one kid but for every kid. As you work through our fine arts and athletics, it is just a wonderful list of celebrations for our students. I would take that all the way down then to page 10. And here's where I would like to shift the focus, not only from where we are with proficiency, but to start to talk about taking on a new lens when we look at our students, and this is the whole not for one student, but for all students. Really, the conversation in education is shifting. Proficiency is important. We want our students to be hitting the benchmarks that are set for them nationally, locally, and our local achievement benchmarks are high. And so sometimes looking at national benchmarks can lower the bar for our students, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep growing them. So we are shifting that focus from proficiency to growth. And when you look at our long-range reading goal, we have had consistent proficiency for a number of years, and we hope to continue to achieve that. As we get into the data that's towards the end of this packet, I'll talk a little more specifically to that. But you can see that as we showed a rebound, if you will, through the pandemic and students had consistent tier 1 or universal tier instruction from students, we have gotten our proficiency marks back up to where they were pre-pandemic. The other piece of this that I would want to focus on is that growth, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but I do want to give Mike the floor again here to talk a little bit about ACT and advanced placement.
Well, again, our ACT average, well, first of all, our participation rate of students taking the ACT has remained high, and the results of those has remained high also. The piece that I do want to make sure that we're bringing back is that before Janine Murphy became a full-time teacher for us, she was instrumental in putting together the ACT prep program for us, and it paid dividends. There was no event. Mr. Spangenberg was involved in that. Dr. Lundberg was involved in that, and we had high participation rate of students coming in on Saturdays and spending time going through practice questions, so on and so forth. Since she's no longer doing that, plus the Scholastic Booster Club that was also sponsoring that, we need to get that group back up and going again. But I just want to point out that that did have a significant help for our students and was of great value. So yes, the scores you see up there are very, very good, but that goes with a community of help doing that, both the coursework and the other piece. And then also our AP participation, you hear a report from me every year. I did a detailed one last April on how well the students did. I can tell you that be prepared. We're going to be coming to that time again. I know you're getting excited. I wish I could give you good news on that one. However, I know that new course offerings, they're going to be coming forward with an AP Environmental Science as a proposal, and then also AP Pre-Calc is a brand new one that was developed. So just to address, yes, we've had that conversation repeatedly. I've been trying. So,
Okay.
so Dr. Bogley has been
9 years on the board and I'm still.
9 years on AP biology, believe me, yes. It is not for lack of trying. So anyway, kind of that's a summary on that, so very good participation.
So as we get to the back end of this report, I would turn focus on two assessments that we pay a lot of attention to, those being ISASP, or the Iowa Statewide Assessment of Student Progress, formerly known as ITBS, Iowa Assessments. It has changed name and format over the years, and so we are refamiliarizing ourselves as everything becomes more and more standards-based and hopefully aligned. This is an area we continue to study. There, again, we are not only focusing on proficiency, we are focusing on growth. So there are essentially 3 lanes that a student can be in. Not proficient yet, like put that in there, proficient and advanced. And we love to see kids move to the right in those lanes, essentially. As you can see on page 16, when you look at, 16 is talking about FastBridge, which is another piece of that, but I wanted to compare ISASP and MAP first. When you move from left to right in those lanes on ISASP, that is an indicator of growth. And we have seen great growth in our students individually and proficiency. So that is a point of celebration. But we do see spots that we want to target and study more with regard to, are we prioritizing the correct standards? And how can we elevate and make sure we're moving the needle for all kids with that ISASP? The same would be true of the measure of academic progress, which is the MAP test put out by NWEA. This test too, this is a test that students sit down also at the computer and are taking a test that looks a little different per student because it responds to how they respond to each question in reading, math, and science. One thing that I would want to clarify here, MAP has national norms, and sometimes you might look at, I'm going to draw your attention, I think it's page 18, my page cut off there, to the MAP results by grade over time. If you look at third grade up at the top and you look at 21, 22, you'll see 53% of their students meeting their growth target. That might sound low. However, that MAP defines a highly effective classroom as 50 to 60% of the students meeting their target RIT growth, that Roush unit. And then if you look at math, it was 62%. So it can become easy to take those percentages and connect them with percentiles or proficiency ratings, when really those are pretty strong indicators of success in our classrooms. So also those local norms are higher than the national norms for MAP, and I would just want to put it that way. I'm going to reel back into Asbridge in our reading assessment that we do. This is the assessment that we do in kindergarten through 6th grades, and this is a moving target. So the target moves throughout the course of the year in those 3 testing periods, fall, winter, and spring, for all students. That again is a benchmark of proficiency, and so this demands students to grow. And when you look at that moving target, you can see very strong numbers. I will tell you that most districts would love to have those numbers when we look at students meeting the benchmark. However, we drill down in our grade level PLCs to every single student and design interventions to hopefully move the needle for them to proficiency and beyond, no matter where they are. And I would want to point out here that a healthy indicator for a system that is helping all students would likely not ever reach 100% here. As much as we would love for all of our kids to be meeting that benchmark, it is likely that because the benchmark is moving, there are approximately 10 to 15 students who would need to get their core instruction plus a little more. And then another 5 to 10% making up that 20% that isn't meeting the benchmark, that would maybe need what we call tier 3 interventions. And so you can see we're well above that 80% mark in our classrooms. And I, again, would come back to how I started off, kind of this summary, just saying 2 words that come to mind as I look through this packet are celebration and resilience. Are there any questions?
I remember in the past for MAP testing, there were a couple years where it was given 3 times through the year for a couple grades, correct? Is that still happening, or is it just twice?
For MAP, we are requiring that there is a beginning and end of the year, and we do offer, and particularly if there's a student that our data points have raised question for maybe more diagnostics, we might have a specific student or a grade or a class take that assessment mid-year as well.
Okay. And that holds true, Dr. Wogley, all the way through 10th grade. It's that winter one is targeted, or if somebody's ready to move out of a program, you just want to make sure, or if they need to stay with it.
Okay.
So the ACT is an interesting indicator to help us understand students that are moving on to higher education. The apprenticeship stuff that's going on is sort of a good indicator that they're moving into trades or something else like that. But we don't have any reflection on that in here. Am I thinking about that the way you're thinking about that collectively? I'm thinking about okay, so ACT measures those going on to higher ed. What about all the other students? They get to graduation rate, right? That's one way to look at it. But how do we know they're going on to be successful in whatever they pursue following high school?
Well, I will tell you that the students that we have in there, they're taking the ACT also. They're also on here. So in other words, gone are the days where, if I go into a registered apprenticeship, I'm just doomed because I'm on the dummy track or something. There is no way, no how. Their skill level has to be up across the board in mathematics, reading, writing, all of it. It's just that at this point in time, that's where their passion is at. But make no mistake, as they move through their apprenticeship and then on to the job, and they look at what's available and out there, if they choose to go on and do their own business, they're going to need every one of those skills, regardless. So
I was just thinking about the metrics. If we start to see a fall off in ACT, it would be nice to know, but the apprentice of the folks who are choosing to go to trades has climbed, and that's the explanation, right? They've simply decided not to go the formal higher ed route and instead sort of the trades higher ed route.
I would say if you start to see a decline in participation in ACT, it's because four-year colleges are no longer even looking at it. That's where you're gonna see.
Are we seeing that already?
Not yet, but that is coming, and I will say that to you because of the fact that Pleasant Valley students do so well in the ACT. I actually got a call a few years back from the regents asking, hey, if we no longer use the ACT and the Regents Admission Index, because it's one of those portions that count, they said if we just use scores on courses that you're taking and then use your GPA, what would you think about that? And my answer was, well, our students would probably be disappointed, but I said, if you really want to replace that, put the ISAP score in there. And that'll give some merit to the fact that now our students at the high school level will look at taking the ISAPs during the spring where, oh, why do I have to worry about that for? It means nothing to me. That all of a sudden that means something because you take it three times during high school. So if you're going to replace something, and they listened to that and they had not heard that before. I said, well, just saying that our students do pretty well on that also. So it just depends.
And we're really trying to track right now the kids who are going on certificate programs is one thing. And also the rate at which kids are graduating from college and success they're having with the National Clearinghouse data, whether they're graduating 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, or they're not even returning after their freshman year. Those are all data points that we are watching along the way to see how successful kids are. Because if you have a lot of kids who are going to college and they drop out after their freshman year, we didn't do something right then to help them be resilient enough to be successful. Or if kids are having to go in and retake a math class or an English class because they didn't test in high enough to do it. So those are other benchmarks that we look at to see where our success is or how our kids are achieving.
No questions at all. So if we start seeing a reduction in the people taking ACT because of this requirement going away, are we still gonna, what percentage of students are taking the ACT right now?
I would have to go back and take a look at the last testing time, but if we had a graduating class of say 350, we were having 280, 285 taking the ACT test at one of the times. Testing periods, so it was still pretty high. And to reinforce what Mr. Strew said, we know watching our post-secondary data, if we get kids from when our counselor's interviewing them in May, and then they show up and enroll in August, we do have the summer drop. There is a summer drop there. It's usually somewhere around 8%, 7 or 8% that choose something else. But once they enroll in August, we see a very high retention rate between year one of college and year two. We might drop 1 or 2%, but that's not where we're at exactly. I'm not saying it's not of concern because percentages have names of students that are associated with that. I never want to forget that. And that's of concern. The other piece that we've really attacked from my academic standpoint is what I've told you 7 or 8 years ago when we had 33% of our students that were going to Scott Community College having to take a remedial math class. That was completely unacceptable. And we have made course changes and curriculum changes, and that last report, 5%. That's an impressive reflection of the hard work of our teachers looking at that saying, no, we can do better.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. So,
Can you come up to the podium and state your name and capacity?
I'm a parent. I have 3 kids at the elementary school level. So I understand the data presented reflects a lot of college-bound information and that sort of stuff. But has any attempt ever been made to capture students going directly into the workforce? And more important to me, going into the military. Because, students can have a successful career and be successful going into the military, whether it's 4 years or 30 years. So has any attempt ever been made to capture that information?
Yes, yes, we do track that information, and at Pleasant Valley, that remains very small, like 4%. It's been somewhere between 3, maybe we'll see a high of 6% going in the military route, but I can assure you it's not for lack of recruiters having full access to our building. They come in to the cafeteria. They have set up all branches of military. Mary Johnson does a fantastic job. She's our career coordinator, making sure that they're in addition to the trips that we take out to the National Guard and the brand new armory that's out there. So we go out there for the construction trades. 8th graders we're taking out there, just exploring, and then they have it set up with the heavy equipment, and so they're having a chance to talk with the kids early on. I think it's a community effort between families saying that this is an okay route, to the school reinforcing that along the way. Plus, we've been very open to students wanting to go to Davenport North if they want to be in Marines ROTC or something like that. I have explored participating in ROTC. That has been the research I've had come back. One, they only allocate so many per area, and so the Air Force is at Davenport West, the Army's at Davenport Central, and then Marine Navy is at Davenport North. So right now, that's kind of where but we've had students, we haven't had anybody go out to West, but we've had go to Central and to North if they want to participate in ROTC. So yes, I acknowledge that, and yeah, my dad's military, and that's where he learned electronics, 4 years.
And that's also a part of the National Clearinghouse data that Mr. Struess spoke to as well. And we want those kids to score as high as possible on their ASVAB.
ASVAB,
as well.
yes.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you want to add? Yes, go ahead.
Zach Olfers, parent in the district. Mike, can you keep us like up to date on if they're going to drop that requirement though for the ACT, like from the regents? Because that's kind of concerning, I would think, because to me, at face value, that kind of says you got an A, right? That's really what they're going to look at. Kind of devalues greatly, I would think, the PVA. I know you guys don't want to say that's probably the better A, right, than maybe XYZ high school. So, putting them on a level playing field, I like your idea. That's exactly right. Replace it with something else that's going to then test everybody on a different, kind of like an outside third-party type test. That's kind of freaked me out a little bit when you mentioned that. So keep us abreast of that.
When they called, I made it clear that was not necessarily our interest, but this is a nationwide thing. And it was caught off of that. So I don't know where the regents in Iowa were at with that, but they were just giving me a heads up.
And it seems like that's a national trend right now. I mean, the Ivies all dropped it a couple years ago, and they've continued dropping, and then many schools subsequently have dropped it. So now a lot of these state schools are like, what do we do if all these other people are dropping it? Why are we still requiring it? So we don't know where that's going to land, but you can voice your opinion as well, because you bring up some valid points regarding that, and because it gives you some context for sure.
Having just gone through the process, I do want Mike also to speak to the fact that ACT, because it's in our backyard in Iowa, there's also the SAT and some other things, but it does come down to the volunteerism and having a resume when you apply. So I'm going to give it to the expert versus the parent who just went through this, because he has way more knowledge, but there's more tests out there than just ACT.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Denise Carey. I have worked for the PV district as a subcontracted bus driver for the last, this is my 7th school year. And I'm in my junior year at Upper Iowa University to become a teacher, hopefully for PV, but I have filled out an employment packet for another district, just saying.
Thanks for that.
And I literally have what I consider hundreds of children in the PV district. I have 2 questions for everyone, and then I was wondering, Brian, if I can have 1 minute of your time after the meeting. When you mentioned the FAFSA instruction, I was a little confused. I was wondering if that is something that has always been offered, or if that is a new thing. I didn't understand if that was a change.
Do you want to talk about what do we do on the evenings?
I absolutely can. So the FAFSA application process, we bring in, Iowa.
University of Iowa.
Yeah, ICANN. They come in and they do a presentation in the theater. Our parents are invited to come in and do that. So that's what we were doing before the board approved the Career and College Ready graduation requirement. Now, all students are really getting an introduction and an explanation about what FAFSA is, why you need to fill this out. It is tied to that connection between success of continuing on in May. I say I'm going to go to a school, but then in August, for whatever, maybe it's financial, that we're losing people because they haven't completed the FAFSA form, so on and so forth. So, yes, seeing that reflected in the board policy is now reflective of what we're actually doing.
And are there people at those ICANN meetings that can speak with English second language folks?
Yes.
Okay. And then my second question is, thank you. My second question is for Mr. Hyatt. I was wondering, is that packet that you were going over with the bullet points and all the statistics, is that available to the public?
Yes.
And is it on the PV website or? Okay.
So tomorrow.
Okay.
Once Beth gets it put up, it'll be underneath. You go to our district. I think it's the third link down, and you'll see the annual report on there, and you can click on it, and what you see on the screen will be the same PDF, then that would be, and you can see all.
Super marvelous, thank you.
I just had one, I guess, question or comment too. I do feel like, similar to what you were saying about capturing all of our students, those students that are in our programs and specialized classrooms and have those IEPs, or even, you know, the extracurricular activities, like I know at the high school they have the Sparkles. If there's a way in our annual report we can kind of capture some of those students a little bit more. I'm not sure how that's measured with the metrics that we have on here as far as their success within our specialized classrooms, either maybe advance out of those classrooms, or even the same thing, post-high school ability to tap into the program that was mentioned at our last board meeting.
I was thinking the same thing. Maybe on the path of the TAP program, we track how many students are in there. That's something that Jill can work through as years go on here and see. Because we had the number of kids involved in that is just phenomenal. And the work experience they're getting. So that's something we can start tracking in here.
Absolutely, and Director Kunkel, you're absolutely right, which is why all of you approved going into that program, is that we want to make sure that our students that might have different abilities, that we're supporting them even beyond age 21. I think that's the beauty of it. They have access to really get their community feet underneath them, so to speak.
And you bring up a really good point to add in, like you mentioned, Sparkles. In those programs we have too, and ultimately, I mean, our goal for all students, right, is to meet those Iowa core benchmarks that we have set out. But I think we could definitely look at how we can highlight more of what you're talking about.
And I guess to that same point, I guess, is there any mention of Edison Academy and our relationship with them, and should that be also placed in this, or does it not?
I think that's a good point. I usually do that separate, but I'll circle back to that.
That's part of our at-risk funding. We'll mention that there in that program.
Do we include any of our service learning requirements in here that our students are maybe involved in?
You know,
those hours? I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know if we did in the past or if it's still, I know it's in our service learning manual book that we have. It's on our website there, but I don't know if it's in here, so.
I don't know if there'd be an opportunity to put that in the spotlights. You know, we talk about all the fine arts and the academics, and we talk about athletics, but I think that kind of adds the community aspect that we're instilling in our students.
Any other comments, suggestions, questions? Okay, then I will take a motion.
I move the board accept the 2021-22 annual report as presented.
Second?
I would probably say, I would amend it to say 2020 annual report as amended with those additions, or with the additional comments, probably. So, Motion by Ms. Kunkel, second by Ms. Hoskins, that the board accept the 2021 annual report as presented and with the additions that we had asked to be placed in them. Roll call vote, please. Ms. Seaman?
While she is doing that, we'll go ahead and post this version tomorrow. But then we can go back and find some of these data points you've mentioned, add them in, and then we can repost it once we get the updates. But give us a few days to get those numbers in line.
I just have to say, those are fantastic suggestions, because it does represent, not for some, but for all.
Another thing I would add, they're just thinking, we are learning more about the new system that was implemented this year for our special education population with the chief, so maybe we can look into whether there is a over percentage or with regard to students that reach their goals and stuff. We'll look into that. Great points.
Ms. Seaman?
Okay. Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Brockman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoskins?
Yes.
Mr. Canwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Wegley?
Yes. Again, thank you for everybody who worked on this. Ms. Marsoon, thank you so much for an additional talent that you bring us every year with this, and we certainly do enjoy your layout with this as well. So thank you again for your extra work. Appreciate it. Okay, next item on the agenda is the SBRC request for allowable growth and supplemental aid for the 2020-2021 special education deficit, which we seem to have every single year. Mr. Klingensmith?
Yeah, and just a correction, that should actually be for the 2021-22 year. The motion does have it correct for the 21-22 year, just on the agenda item. That just didn't get updated for the 2021-22 year. So this is an item that we have on the agenda at this board meeting pretty much every year. What we're doing is we're asking the board to approve a request to the SBRC, which SBRC stands for the School Budget Review Committee, to receive allowable growth and supplemental aid for the 2021-22 special education deficit. Allowable growth is the equivalent of spending authority in your general fund. Supplemental aid, the reason we get supplemental aid, about at least 75%, I believe, still of the districts in the state of Iowa do run a deficit in special education, but there are some districts in Iowa that have actually a surplus in special education. How we get supplemental aid is the state goes in and divides up those districts that have a surplus in special education. They divide that surplus among all the districts in the state that have a deficit in special education to kind of equal things out. So that's what the supplemental aid part of it is. For the 2021-22 fiscal year, we did have a pretty large increase in our special ed deficit. A year ago, for the 2020-21 fiscal year, our deficit was $767,750. For 2021-22, that deficit increased to $1,356,328.43. There's three main reasons that there can be pretty big fluctuations from year to year in the amount of the special ed deficit. One reason has to do with Medicaid billing. Medicaid billing generates revenue which helps to lower the special education deficit. Here at Pleasant Valley, we have participated in Medicaid billing since the 2005-2006 fiscal year. So we've been doing it for about 15 or 16 years now. We did have a significant increase in the amount that we billed for Medicaid in the 2021-22 fiscal year. For the 21-22 fiscal year, we brought in just under $850,000 in Medicaid revenue. A year ago, for the 2020-21 fiscal year, we had brought in about $688,000 in Medicaid revenue. So that was up by about $161,000 or 23.4% increase in the amount that we brought in this last year for Medicaid revenue. A big thank you to Dawn Tagon, who came over towards the end of the fiscal year and really helped us get caught up on the Medicaid billing and helped with that increase in our Medicaid billing for the year. So as I said, the Medicaid billing actually decreases your special ed deficit. So if we had not had that Medicaid billing, our deficit would have been about $850,000 more than what you're seeing here that we actually ended up having for our special ed deficit. Another thing that affects the fluctuation in the special ed deficit is the state has continued to make it more difficult to classify a special education student at the higher levels of funding, which increases the special ed deficit. We had a few students this year that we actually spent, they were what you call high-cost claims. We had claims over $100,000 or expenses over $100,000 for those special ed students. So that can also greatly affect your special ed deficit if you have high-cost students. But then the other big reason for our increase in our special ed deficit this last year had to do with the number of students served. On count day in the 2020-21 fiscal year, we had 337 students being served. So that's what our funding for special ed was based on, was the count day for the 2021 fiscal year when we were serving 337 students. By count day in the 2021-22 fiscal year, we were up to 384 students. And then by the end of last fiscal year, we were up to 418 special ed students being served. So you can see we jumped by nearly 100 students or so just during that time period in the number of students being served in special ed, as we had quite a few students with special ed needs move into the district during the year. So that is the other big reason for the fluctuation and the increase in the special ed deficit last year. So again, what we're asking the board to do, and one thing I should also point out in special ed that we've pointed out before in the past is we have no choice. If it's in a student's IEP that we need to spend the money on a piece of equipment, for example, we have to do that. We can't just say we don't have the money to do it. We are required to do that if it's in their IEP. So again, what we're asking the board to approve tonight is a request to the School Budget Review Committee to get allowable growth, which is the equivalent of spending authority, and supplemental aid for the amount of our special ed deficit of the $1,356,328.43 for the 2021-22 fiscal year. So I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions on that.
What causes the disconnect at the state level? I mean, it's basically the state's just trying to squeeze people out of the top tiers. I guess it feels like there's a disconnect between that and what happens in the IEPs that drives the costs. Can you help me understand why it feels like there's a disconnect and whether there really is or isn't?
It's a good question. It's disconnect, or I mean, you look at one thing we've always talked to legislation about is what's the weighting we receive for a student who has IEP needs. I think when you look at the weighting that we receive, and you look at, for example, whether it's level 1, level 2, or level 3, as Mike mentioned, what we get for a high need student is not anywhere probably close to what the actual cost is to do that. And until I think they increase those weightings, that you might see a difference. It's a lot of it. It really is.
So is the reason why the numbers, the change from, let's say, 384 to 418, is that because of open enrollment, or are people being moved to an IEP sometime in that school year and they weren't before? How that number is increasing?
No, like I said, we've had a lot of students just move into the district who were special ed, needing special ed services. Debbie, I don't know if you can answer as far as.
Well, and also a student mid-year might be placed on an IEP.
Yeah, so they didn't initially, and then they
I would
required
say
it.
open enrollment only if a child was previously an open enrolled student and then was assigned an IEP. The only time open enrollment would have an impact.
I think the other thing, when you look at our percentage of students who receive services, and you look at the growth you see there, it's not changing drastically to what our growth would be that we're seeing across the district. So for example, if you have 6% of your students who are in special ed one year, it's pretty much 6% the next year. We don't see drastic, it's just that every time you increase it, you're just seeing more cost. And that's what we're seeing here. And, you know, I look back to what we are paying, this 1.3 we're talking about tonight. 2 years ago, it was 1.3 also. So, 2 years ago, we had a number of students who our level 3 was down by 12 students because some had elected to stay home for that time frame because of needs. So again, that was one reason we were low that year, but now we're back up to pretty much the same number we had before. So I think that's why you see 2 years ago being the same as what we saw this last year. So there's just a lot of factors that play into all of that.
And if I may, I think it's also important to keep in mind that just the students might go on an IEP, but they also come off IEPs. So it's changing every day.
And that would be another thing that we would want, or achieve, new system Mr. Hyatt talked about, to track and be sure we're looking at that data too, because that's wonderful data to celebrate when students are able to go off of IEPs too.
And we have as you imagine, we have a spreadsheet, but it goes way back and it tracks. You know, here's where they were in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. What are you seeing? How many kids are coming in that year? Or how many kids are leaving that year? So we try to look at all those trends to make sure we're not doing something we're over-identifying or misidentifying. I mean, those are all things that we watch very closely internally to make sure we're doing what's best for all kids. And our goal of student IEP is to eventually have them transition out of that IEP. So that's a good thing. You know, so it's, those are all benchmarks that we look at.
And I would also add in there that much like our student enrollment and our class size, we talk about class size maximums and how we're dedicated to that because we know how important that is. We want to meet our special needs learners' needs as best as possible too. And so we very closely monitor our special education caseload, which is why, you know, we, just like with our class size maximums, if we're having to decline open enrollment, which we don't like to have to do, we have to take that into consideration with our special education caseloads as well.
I think what Mr. Hyatt said is really important for here and our community to understand when it comes to open enrollment. We cannot deny a student with an IEP an open enrollment opportunity unless we have to add a teacher, add a program, or add part of the building. And we track that very closely to make sure that we are in compliance with that.
Talking about the Medicaid billing, and you know, Medicaid has changed. It's probably been in the state of Iowa over the last several years. Dealing with Medicaid billing a lot in my practice. Are we capturing every dollar we possibly can when it comes to Medicaid billing? And what's their AR? What is our AR with them with regards to Medicaid? Are they pretty good about paying, or do we have a lot of that still needs to be paid and they take 90 days to pay it? How is that doing with the district?
I believe they pay it pretty quickly. I don't think we've been having to wait too long to get it.
Okay.
And I think, you know, just when you look back to where he started, Mike mentioned it earlier, we started this in 06, 07, and actually it's like 05, 06, and $46,000 is what we brought in that year. You know, now we're up to $850,000.
Yeah, but like, I guess my question is, if we are potentially supposed to get $1.2 million and want to get $800,000, where is that $400,000? Why are we not getting it? Because we want to capture every dollar we possibly can. So that's basically my question is, we're having a big AR with that, or they're pretty good and we're capturing every dollar we can.
I believe, especially with the addition of Dawn and Jill, that I think that's going to help even more. But I think we've been doing a good job anyway of capturing. We work a lot with our aides and teachers on identifying Medicaid eligible students.
And the awesome thing that's happening with Dawn, and I won't take any credit because, well, I was part of hiring Dawn, but what an awesome, I mean, seriously, talk about, she is focused on that and has developed a very, very clear and concise slide deck presentation forms, systems, her blue folder systems, and has gone out to our different schools. And what's been really fascinating is, you know, when you're a special education teacher, that's not the first thing you think of as like Medicaid, right? You're thinking about instruction for the students, but Dawn's really done a great job of working with our aides, our paraeducators, our teachers to explain the why. Right? Why is this so important for us? And comments she's gotten back have been amazing. Like, wow, I didn't know that. Or so she's really put together, and I can share it with any of you if you want to see it. It's a great training, and she'll just make herself available for any questions. And there's been tons of questions, right? And she's utilizing forms. Not that we weren't doing it right before, but since we now have that central person to really hone in and focus on it, it's just going to make a huge difference for us. And she is on it. She's like, they're all gonna hate me because I keep bothering them, but she reviews it when it comes in and does internal audits. She sends forms back and says, nope, look at this again, we need to bill it, this isn't matching the IEP. And teachers, you know, right away, we've had to go through the process a few times and send things back, but it'll be a well-oiled machine in the next couple months.
Okay, great.
And I see Mr. Struess laughing because he knows Dawn is on it.
Awesome.
It's a great hire.
Maybe it would make sense to have her come back in a couple of months, talk through that and tell us what gaps are still there that she can still use help.
You're just gonna report on that since it's
That would be great.
almost $800,000 that we're getting from them.
Absolutely.
So that would be great. Okay. Any other question? Any other? Oh, yes, go ahead.
My name is Kevin Bott. My kids go to Hopewell. I remember having this conversation at the end of the school district year last year. Isn't there also kind of a wraparound for recovery for some of this if you don't get it through the state or through Medicaid, that you can go to the
there is.
space for that?
There is, when we do our certified budget each year, there's a thing called the cash reserve levy, and we can actually levy cash to recover the cash from the special ed deficit too. That's a good point.
So that's why I thought it might be good to point that out to everybody too.
Yeah, good point. Sorry, I forgot to mention that also. So in addition to getting the spending authority, that's how we get the cash to back the spending authorities, through the cash reserve levy.
Thank you.
Any questions? If not, I will take a motion.
I move that the board authorize a request to the School Budget Review Committee, SBRC, for the allowable growth in the amount of the district's final 2021-22 special education deficit of $1,356,328.43, or the amount determined by the DE after review, and a request for supplemental aid based on the amount of the district's final 2021-22 special education deficit of $1,356,328.43, for the amount determined by the DE after review.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hoskins, second by Mr. Ayers, that the board authorize a request to the School Budget Review Committee, SBRC, for allowable growth in the amount of the district's final 2021-2022 special education deficit of $1,356,328.43, or the amount determined by the DE after review, and a request for supplemental aid based on the amount of the district's final 2021-2022 special education deficit of $1,356,328.43, or the amount determined by the DE after review. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Damon.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman? Yes. Mrs. Hoskins?
Yes.
Mr. Kenwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Walkley?
Yes. Okay, and then finally, monthly financial reports for June, July, and August of 2022. Mr. Klingensmith?
All right, we are through another fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th of each year. So you have in the board packet the monthly financial reports for June of 2022, July of 2022, and August of 2022. Because it's the end of the fiscal year, I usually spend just a little bit more time summarizing the fiscal year results for the end of the fiscal year. So I'm just going to go through and highlight some of the key financial highlights for this fiscal year that was just completed. The district's fund balance in our general fund during 2021-22 increased by $605,344, or 5.3% increase in our general fund balance during the year. Fund balance, for those not familiar with accounting terminology, is not just your cash balance, but it also includes your accounts receivable, the money that you're owed from others at the end of the fiscal year and subtracts out your accounts payable, the amount that you owe to other people or other vendors, for example, during the fiscal year. That's how you come to your fund balance. So again, that was up $605,344 or 5.3% during the fiscal year. So our fund balance at June 30th, 2022 in the general fund is now just under $12 million at $11,942,860. The district's cash balance during the last fiscal year increased by $116,161 or 0.7%. So our cash balance in our general fund at June 30th of 2022 was $17,501,074. So just a small increase in our actual cash balance in the general fund. One other very key thing that we look at in general fund finances is the district's unspent carryover. Unspent carryover is if you take your spending authority for the year minus your expenses for the year, that gives you how much your unspent carryover is. The district's unspent carryover during this last fiscal year also increased by $829,701 or 5.9%. So at June 30th, 2022, our total unspent carryover on our general fund ended up at $14,895,855. So while all of those things increased, you got to again realize too that the district's enrollment has been increasing pretty dramatically over the past number of years also. So you would expect those numbers, hope and expect for those numbers to be increasing. And I believe they are increasing at a similar proportion to what our growth is. I wouldn't say they're out of line with what you would expect the increases to be in your fund balance, cash balance, or your unspent carryover year to year. The other key ratio in Iowa school finance that districts look at is your solvency ratio, which your solvency ratio is your unassigned fund balance in the general fund plus your assigned fund balance in the general fund divided by your total general fund revenue for the year. And we do subtract out our AE flow through from the year from general fund revenue, since that really isn't school district revenue, it's just passed through to the AEA. Our solvency ratio for the 2021-22 fiscal year dropped just slightly. It dropped from 17.78% a year ago down to 17.24% at June 30th of 2022. So about a 0.5 percentage point drop in our solvency ratio during the fiscal year. There are two main reasons for the decrease in the district solvency ratio during the fiscal year. One of them is because Forest Grove Elementary School opened up in the 21-22 fiscal year, we did have a lot of one-time purchases for getting Forest Grove Elementary School started this year. The other fairly significant item in that 0.5% decrease in our solvency ratio has to do with what Mr. Strews talked about earlier in the meeting, where we took some money that we were normally paying for out of our physical plant and equipment levy fund, the school bus leases and technology equipment purchases for the year, and we paid for those this last fiscal year, and our plan is to pay for those this current fiscal year also out of the general fund rather than out of the PEPAL fund in order to free up money in the PEPAL fund to pay for those things we talked about earlier, the chillers and boilers and roof replacements and things like that. So we felt like we needed the extra money more in the PEPAL fund than we did in the general fund, so that's why we did that. Not that we have excess money in the general fund, but sometimes you just have to weigh which one benefits the most, and so that's why we made that plan for 2 years to pay for those things out of the general fund rather than the PEPAL fund. So that also was a key factor in our 0.5% decrease in the solvency ratio in the general fund this last fiscal year. District revenue in the general fund this last year increased by 5.5%. District expenses in the general fund this last fiscal year increased by 10.3%. And again, for the same reason I just mentioned is why our expenses in the general fund this last fiscal year increased by a higher percentage than our revenue increased by. And that was, again, the one-time purchases related to opening Forest Grove and then paying for those things out of the general fund rather than the PEPAL fund were the reason for the larger increase in our expenses percentage-wise than our increase in our revenue in the general fund. Couple other things related to general fund, and again, stop me if you have any questions as I go through this. Miscellaneous income grants, there was a 17.2% increase in miscellaneous incomes grants revenue during 2021-22. A significant reason for this increase was something that we also just talked about a few minutes ago, that 23.4% increase in Medicaid billing. Medicaid is considered, it falls under the category of grants. So that was very big reason for the increase in our miscellaneous income from grants revenue in the general fund was that 23.4% increase in Medicaid billing during the year. You'll notice on the on the general fund revenue, we had about 89.2% increase in our transfers from the nutrition fund into the general fund during the fiscal year. The reason for that is because the basic school lunches were free during the 2021-22 school year, the district received a much larger federal reimbursement to our lunch program, and you'll see that when we look at the nutrition fund here in a few minutes. Well, indirect costs in the nutrition fund are billed based on a percentage of the federal reimbursement amount. So because we had a much larger reimbursement from the federal government in our nutrition fund, that also greatly increased how much we could bill for indirect costs from the nutrition fund to transfer to the general fund. So that was the reason for that big increase in that revenue line in the general fund this year. Also, there was a $20,972 or a 46.6% increase in interest income during the fiscal year in the general fund. Right, the last quarter of the fiscal year, April, May, and June, we had about a 0.5% increase in interest rates on our bank accounts that we have in the district. So that was the big reason for, and I'm sure everybody's been seeing that on the news, the interest rates are going up both for what you have to pay for interest if you borrow money, but interest rates are going up also on the money that you have in savings and stuff. So that was the reason for the 46.6%, the main reason for the 46.6% increase in our interest income during the year in the general fund. So that summarizes everything in the general fund, all the key highlights that I had there. Unless anybody has any questions on that, I'm just going to go through some of the highlights in some of the other funds for June fiscal year end. Our management fund balance increased by $58,872 during the fiscal year. Our PEPAL fund, our physical plant and equipment levy fund, increased by $776,561 during the 2021-22 fiscal year. And again, the reason for that mainly had to do with the fact that we shifted those expenses that normally would have been paid for out of the PEPAL fund into the general fund. So it was our intent to increase the PEPAL fund balance this last fiscal year, and that did happen. Capital Projects Fund, the fund balance of the Capital Projects Fund increased by $1,396,357 during the fiscal year. This was mainly due to the accumulation of proceeds from the statewide penny sales tax to be used for future building projects. The last 2 or 3 years, the fund balance in the Capital Projects Fund decreased by quite a bit. That was when we were still paying the majority of the expenses related to the construction of Forest Grove Elementary School. Well, we do still owe a little bit of money on Forest Grove, but last fiscal year, we did not have significant amount of money paid towards that project. So that's why we actually had an increase in the Capital Projects Fund balance during this last fiscal year. Our debt service fund, the $302,212,000 ending balance in the debt service fund represents money that has been transferred to the debt service fund from the capital projects fund and the PEPAL fund to make principal and interest payments on the sales tax revenue bonds and the PEPAL general obligation school loan note that we have borrowed over the past 7 years or so. So that's what that money is set aside for, is to make payments for the principal and interest on our previous borrowings in the district. The nutrition fund, I mentioned earlier, our federal reimbursements that we received in the nutrition fund increased by $1,652,377, or 92% over the previous year in the nutrition fund. So again, students were still having free basic lunches during the 2021-22 fiscal year. We did have an increase in our food sales revenue by $312,199 during the last fiscal year, about a 73% increase. And that's because students, they still had to pay for, if they wanted a la carte items, they did still have to pay for those. And this last school year, of course, kids were going full-time all the entire school year, as opposed to the previous year, the 2021 year, when we were hybrid for a portion of the year. So that was the big reason for the 73% increase in our food sales revenue in the nutrition fund during the last fiscal year. Our food purchases increased during the year by $1,011,204, or a big 143.7% increase in our food purchases for the year. But then again, that also went up because students were, there was no hybrid during the year. Students were in school full-time during the year, so there was more food purchases needed during the year because of that reason. So the fund balance in the nutrition fund for the year increased by $1,125,369, or a 58% increase during the fiscal year in our nutrition fund balance. The next item I'm going to point out is we have a new fund in the school district. It's called the Student Construction Fund. This is a new fund that was created. Per our auditors, it was necessary to account for the student construction of the airplane project that we have going on in the district. Mr. Zimmer has, I believe, talked about that project at some previous school board meetings. The $88,134 fund balance in that fund at the end of the fiscal year reflects the to-date cost of the parts purchased for the building of the airplane. And so again, our auditors, per state regulations, said that we needed to account for that money in a separate fund. So this is a new fund that we will have as long as we are still building airplanes.
We keep doing that. Anybody want to buy a plane?
And then the internal service fund in the district is the fund that is used to account for the district's self-funded health, or partially self-funded health insurance plan, and also the district's self-funded dental insurance plan. Health insurance claims and administration fees for the district increased by $817,360, or 15.4% during the 21-22 fiscal year. So it was not a particularly great year as far as health insurance claims goes for the district. And of course, everybody, I think, is aware of inflation and how much that is affecting health insurance costs and stuff. Dental insurance claims and admin fees for the district for the year increased by $10,942, or 3.3%. The fund balance in the internal service fund, because of that increase in the health insurance claims and admin fees, it did cause our fund balance in the internal service fund to decrease by $103,325, or 2.5% during the 2021-22 fiscal year. We are required to file a report each year with the state called a 509A report that shows what our fund balance is in the internal service fund. And our fund balance still remains above the state required minimum balances by quite a bit. in the internal service fund, so there's no need for concern. We're still above the state required minimum balances in the internal service fund. And then lastly, the student activity funds. We just had a very small increase in our fund balance in the student activity funds during the year of $17,278, a 2.2% increase in the student activity funds balance during the fiscal year. So that summarizes the key financial highlights for 2021-22 fiscal year. Our auditors were here just after Labor Day and completed the field work for the audit. It looks like we're gonna have a very clean audit report again. We will present that to you towards the end of the calendar year, probably at a late November or December board meeting. And then we'll go ahead and apply again for the 7th year in a row to try to get the certificate for excellence in financial reporting from the Association of School Business Officials International and the Government Finance Officers Association. We'll apply for those again and hopefully get those again this year. So that summarizes June. Does anybody have any questions on the June monthly financials?
I was looking at the general fund summary where you have, where it shows your slightly conservative estimates for income and slightly conservative estimates for expenses and how close they are. And I'm just wondering if the auditors gave you like a big gold star, how close you came to all of those. I mean, that's impressive.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we did not get a gold star, but I guess
I'll give you a gold star.
I consider getting the certificates at the end of the
Yeah.
year the equivalent of a gold star. So,
Well, thank your team for all their hard work, because I know.
I will, yeah. Yeah, special thanks to Lori Wakeland, the district staff accountant who works underneath me, and she's heavily involved in that budgeting part of it too, and
Well, she gets a gold
so,
star.
yeah, I'll share our gold star with her too then, so yeah.
I just want to echo your thanks to them. I mean, what they do for us every single day is amazing. I mean, we can go in there, we got, the purchases and decisions you have to make every single day. And you're asking, okay, where are we on projections today? Where do you see us landing at the end of the year? How are we gonna fund this? Can you shift it from one to another? They're on top of it all the time and they give us the best advice as we go through this. So, like you said, there's small changes and that's a good thing to see. So, thanks to them.
Thank you. Then we also have the July and August monthly financials in the board packet, and there's not a whole lot of activity, of course, that happens in July, especially financially related. A little bit more in August with school starting on the 23rd of August, but I did not see anything unusual that stood out to me on either the July or the August monthly financial reports. So unless anybody has any questions, I'll take any questions if there are any. Otherwise, we just need a motion to approve the June, July, and August monthly financial reports then.
I have one question, not really related to the reports, but I was at the Scott County Board of Supervisors meeting this last Wednesday, and as you know, interest rates are going up, but there's maybe a little bit of slowdown in the real estate market, but there hasn't been for so many years, or for the last year. It's been a really hot market. Prices have gone up, assessments have all gone up, so they're estimating that appraisals are gonna go up, that property tax can potentially go up for all of these, for our assessments, up 15, 18% next year, because of everything that's going on with regards to how quickly houses are selling. If that does happen, how will that trickle down to the school district?
Well, if the assessed valuations go up, then that helps the school district because.
So it would, like, out of that, let's say it ends up being 18%, what
Mhm.
percentage will we see of that approximately?
It's hard to say.
Back and look what our.
You know, the past several years, valuations, taxable valuations in the district have been going up anywhere from 4 to 6.5% or so. That gives you an indication of where we've been over the past few years, so it would definitely be record breaking if they went up that amount.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Not good for taxpayers in
No,
the
not at
district,
all.
but it would benefit the school district.
Okay. we'll see what happens with that, but, yeah, that was what the, that was some of the speculation at least, at the meeting this last week. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take a, motion then.
I move the board accept the monthly financial reports for June, July, and August 2022 as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ayers, second by Mr. Camerich, that the board accept the monthly financial reports for June, July, August 2022 as presented. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Dean.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Blackman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoskins?
Yes.
Mr. Canwisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Kunkel?
Yes.
Dr. Wegley?
Yes. And thank you again, Mike, for all your diligent work regarding this and continuing to steer us in the right direction and making sure that we don't get into any financial trouble. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So, next on, is, our, future dates. We have, October 10th at our next, board meeting, and then October 24th, also our next board meeting, which will be at 6 p.m. And then normally there is a October date for an MBAEA banquet, but that's gonna be in March, and the date is yet to be determined. So look for further information on that. And then, we also have the IASB meeting coming up in the middle of November. For those who are interested in going, please let Ms. Damon know. Many of you probably already gonna go if you already told her about it, because she needs to secure, hotel arrangements. So just remember to let her know if you are planning to come at the last minute. And then we have one other announcement.
As we look at future dates, Tina, do you want to share a little bit?
So Superintendent Strus, board members, PV administration, and PV community, I will be stepping down from the board as of October 10th as I'm moving out of the area. Please accept this as my formal notice. Regards, Christina Anderson, Director, District 6, Pleasant Valley School District.
So with Director Anderson stepping down, I think I want you guys to think about a couple things as far as dates moving forward. This is kind of like, Catherine, I know you had to go through this process as well when coming into an open seat like this. Director Anderson's seat would be up in November of 2023. So a year from now is when seat would be up for an election. When you follow board policy 201.4, when there's a vacancy, what we will do is with her resignation now, Debbie will go ahead and get a hold of the county auditors tomorrow and get with them in terms of what does this look like in terms of getting a publication out there. Probably shooting for Friday to get that out there. With board policy, typically what we end up doing is we look for, we would have, the process we typically go through would be we would have interviews for anyone who's interested in being part of District 6, which she's a part of, during probably our October 24th board meeting. We do interviews, and then so in this process, the reason why they have 14 days and 30 days. I'll start with that. 14 days is if we were going to have a special election come forward in 14 days, that could be a possibility. Or in 30 days, you have to have someone seated by the interview process. So right now, when you look at 30 days, one thing I want you to think about would be if we start with her last board meeting being October 10th, 30 days from that time, the best part would be is if we move November 14th board meeting to November 7th. That makes, so moving it 1 week earlier would allow us to get within that 30-day window to seat somebody in that position. So what we'd have is we'd have tonight, or let's go October 10th, October 24th are scheduled. We then would typically have 3 weeks before our next November board meeting. So really we'd have our normal 1 week off, another one on November 7th, and then we keep our November 28th board meeting also. So look at your calendars. We won't make it an agenda item. It's not an agenda item tonight or any motion tonight. But at our next board meeting, think about, can we move November 14th to November 7th to allow us to potentially seat somebody for Tina's position at that time. Again, we do interviews during the October 24th board meeting is when that would be in place. So she would, again, Tina would still be here on October 10th would be her last board meeting. And then the next day is when that 30-day window starts to have someone in place, hopefully seated at that time.
Anybody have any questions regarding that? Okay, then I guess, is there anything else for the good of the order? Not this meeting.